This is CBS News Special Report. I'm Carissa Lawson in New York.
In the waters of the Persian Gulf, one of the most intense and high-stakes naval confrontations in modern history unfolded between two world powers, the United States and Iran. A region already known for its geopolitical tensions, it became the stage for a dramatic clash of military might, intelligence, and strategy. But what led to this showdown? How did two of the most powerful naval forces in the world find themselves in a deadly game of cat and mouse? For decades, the US and Iran have been locked in a complex and often hostile relationship, with both nations regularly flexing their military muscles in the strategic waters of the Persian Gulf. But it was in 2019 that the world witnessed one of the most dangerous moments in this ongoing maritime rivalry. In an area that handles over a third of the world's oil trade, every naval movement is scrutinized, and every misstep can escalate into a global crisis. The stakes couldn't be higher. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard, equipped with small, fast boats and missile systems, constantly challenged the U.S. Navy's colossal aircraft carriers and advanced destroyers. Iran's naval strategy hinges on asymmetry, leveraging speed, surprise, and technological innovation to counterbalance the overwhelming firepower of the American fleet. This is a battle where the big guns don't always win. The tension came to a head when a series of attacks and confrontations led to a near-deadly encounter. Iranian forces fired missiles, engaged in high-speed maneuvers, and launched drone strikes. On the other side, the U.S. Navy's massive aircraft carriers, armed with some of the most advanced weaponry in the world, responded with airstrikes and countermeasures. Both sides were pushed to the edge, aware that a single mistake could spiral into full-blown war. This wasn't just a fight over naval dominance. It was about control of one of the world's most vital shipping lanes. It was about power, prestige, and the struggle for influence in the Middle East. Every inch of water, every radar sweep, and every shot fired carried consequences that would echo across the globe. But what really happened in this face-off? How close did the US and Iran come to an all-out naval conflict? What were the strategies, the risks, and the unexpected twists that made this encounter so significant? In this video, we'll dive deep into the events that unfolded in the Persian Gulf, exploring the naval tactics used by both nations, the international impact of this clash, and what it reveals about the future of military confrontations at sea. What drove both sides to the brink? And what lessons can we learn from this high-stakes maritime standoff? Stay with us as we uncover the gripping details behind one of the most intriguing naval confrontations of the modern era. The tension between Iran and the United States in the Persian Gulf has been a simmering conflict for decades, fueled by geopolitical interests, strategic military positioning, and the region's vast oil reserves. The significance of this stretch of water, connecting the Arabian Gulf to the rest of the world, cannot be overstated. It is one of the most crucial shipping lanes in the world, responsible for transporting nearly a third of the planet's oil, making it a flashpoint for international powers. For years, both nations have navigated this contentious space, engaging in a silent yet continuous standoff, where any misstep could trigger massive consequences. The US and Iran have been locked in a complex rivalry for more than 40 years, with their naval forces often acting as proxies in the larger geopolitical struggle. The roots of this conflict go back to 1979, when the Iranian Revolution led to the fall of the pro-American Shah and the rise of the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. The subsequent US investment embassy hostage crisis, where American diplomats were held captive for 444 days, marked a beginning of a strained and often hostile relationship. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the U.S. attempted to isolate Iran diplomatically, imposing sanctions and military pressure, while Iran worked to expand its regional influence, particularly in the Gulf. Iran's military, while not on par with the U.S. Navy in terms of sheer size or technological capability, employs an unconventional strategy that often levels the playing field. The Iranian Navy, particularly the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, IRGCN, has become adept at using asymmetrical tactics to challenge the might of the U.S. forces. These tactics include swarming with fast, lightly armed boats, launching missile attacks, and utilizing the terrain to its advantage. Iran's use of small, fast boats, capable of launching precision missiles and other armaments, creates a persistent threat to the larger, more expensive U.S. vessels, which are forced to engage in a battle of nerves, constantly on alert for Iranian provocations. In recent years, the Persian Gulf became a powder keg, as both nations' naval assets began to converge more frequently. Despite their vast differences, both the U.S. Navy and Iran's IRGCN are strategically positioned near one another, often operating within the same confined space. In the summer of 2019, the situation reached its boiling point. A series of incidents, including attacks on commercial ships and military vessels, brought the two forces dangerously close to a direct confrontation. Iranian forces were suspected of attacking multiple oil tankers, a move that the U.S. quickly attributed to Tehran's expanding influence over regional proxy groups and its direct control over militant factions in the Gulf. These attacks served as a warning to the U.S. that Iran was not only prepared to challenge them militarily, but was also willing to destabilize the oil market in retaliation for the U.S. sanctions crippling its economy. But things weren't as straightforward as they seemed. In the days leading up to a pivotal encounter, Iranian intelligence reportedly intercepted communications between U.S. naval units, learning their movements and strategies. It was said that Iran used these intercepted communications to position its forces in a way that created a false sense of confidence among U.S. commanders, lulling them into a dangerous complacency. On the other hand, the U.S. military, operating under the assumption that Iran would not risk direct confrontation, continued its maneuvers, pushing deeper into Iranian-controlled waters. This created the perfect storm for a showdown. The critical moment arrived when a small flotilla of Iranian speedboats, believed to be heavily armed with a new type of missile designed to disable larger vessels, confronted a U.S. destroyer. Reports indicated that the destroyer's radar systems were initially unable to track the incoming boats, as they were using sophisticated countermeasures to remain undetected until the last possible moment. As the speedboats closed in, the U.S. Navy's crew prepared for what they feared was an imminent attack. Tensions skyrocketed, and just as the boats were within striking distance, the U.S. Navy launched a counterstrike, firing warning shots. The situation was averted, but only by the narrowest of margins. In the aftermath, both sides claimed victory. The U.S. touted its ability to repel Iranian provocations, while Iran claimed that it had successfully sent a message to the U.S. that it would not back down from defending its interests in the Gulf. Yet the shadow of the encounter remained, with both nations on edge, understanding that the next provocation could push them into full-blown conflict. The events of 2019 served as a stark reminder of how fragile peace can be in such a volatile region. What was once a skirmish between naval forces now stood as a symbol of the broader global power struggle in the Middle East, one that could have devastating consequences if not carefully managed. The buildup to any military confrontation between Iran and the United States in the Persian Gulf is never simple, as both nations have long histories of military engagement in the region. The tensions, however, escalated dramatically in the years leading up to the critical moments of naval confrontations. These events were fueled by a complex combination of political maneuvering, military posturing, and the ongoing battle for control over the world's most vital shipping routes. Iran has always viewed the Persian Gulf as its backyard. Since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran has worked to consolidate its influence in the region, using both diplomacy and military means. Its military strategy has always been asymmetric, recognizing that it could not match the United States in terms of conventional military strength. Instead, Iran relied on smaller, highly mobile units and a network of proxy forces that spanned the region. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, the force responsible for much of Iran's naval activities, became the key player in shaping Iranian maritime power. Unlike traditional naval forces, the IRGC Navy has specialized in using small, fast boats armed with anti-ship missiles and mines, designed to challenge much larger and more advanced naval forces. Their tactics have always been centered around hit-and-run operations, relying on surprise and speed to offset the sheer power of the U.S. Navy. In the mid-2000s, the United States began increasing its military presence in the Persian Gulf, especially after the invasion of Iraq. The U.S. military had a significant naval footprint in the region, with aircraft carriers and destroyers constantly patrolling the waters. In response, Iran's naval forces began to conduct more frequent and aggressive maneuvers. As tensions between the two countries continued to rise, particularly after the 2007 nuclear standoff, the U.S. Navy and the IRGC found themselves engaged in numerous tense encounters. These included close calls in which Iranian boats harassed American warships, firing warning shots and performing high-speed maneuvers around U.S. vessels. At times, these provocations led to dangerously close moments, with both sides coming alarmingly close to open conflict. The situation further deteriorated in 2011, when a series of Iranian missile tests in the Strait of Hormuz caused alarm in Washington. Iran had developed a new generation of missiles capable of targeting large naval vessels, and they made a clear statement that they could close the strait if threatened. This threat was not just military but economic as well, as the Strait of Hormuz is a key choke point for global oil shipments. The U.S. responded by bolstering its naval presence, ensuring that its aircraft carriers and military assets were always ready to respond. By the time we reached 2019, the tension between the U.S. and Iran had reached a boiling point. The Trump administration had withdrawn from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and reinstated harsh sanctions on Tehran, leading to a sharp decline in Iran's oil exports. These sanctions and the economic pressure that followed made Iran more aggressive in asserting its power in the Gulf. Iran began to disrupt international shipping in the region, and the United States began a campaign of maximum pressure, aiming to force Iran into submission. The Iranian government, desperate to protect its sovereignty and weaken the U.S.'s hold on the region, began to ramp up its naval activities. During this time, Iran's naval strategy became more evident. They increased the frequency of missile tests and conducted naval exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, demonstrating their capability to strike U.S. warships. But it wasn't just the missile tests that raised alarms. Iran also began developing a new fleet of fast, stealthy boats, equipped with advanced anti-ship cruise missiles, some of which had been designed in secret military workshops. These boats were intended to swarm U.S. ships in overwhelming numbers, making it impossible for the larger vessels to fend off the onslaught. Intelligence reports indicated that Iran had developed a radar jamming system that could cloak these boats, making it even harder for the U.S. Navy to detect them in time. In response, the United States held a series of joint military exercises with its regional allies, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, preparing for a possible escalation. At the same time, the U.S. Navy began increasing its presence in the Gulf, deploying more destroyers and additional air support to deter any Iranian aggression. U.S. commanders in the region were under constant pressure to avoid missteps, as any confrontation could quickly spiral out of control. By 2019, the situation reached a crisis point when several oil tankers in the Gulf were attacked, with the United States accusing Iran of being behind the strikes. The attacks marked a significant escalation, and the U.S. responded with a massive show of force, sending additional warships to the region. Iran, however, denied involvement in the attacks and insisted that it was merely protecting its territorial waters. This back and forth created a volatile atmosphere, with both nations maneuvering their forces closer to one another. The stage was set for a potentially catastrophic naval clash, as the two powers were now on a direct collision course. The increasing provocations, the buildup of military assets, and the heightened sense of mistrust between the two sides created the perfect storm for a dramatic confrontation. And as tensions mounted, the world watched, aware that any miscalculation could lead to a major conflict that would have far-reaching consequences for the Middle East and beyond. The tension that had been building for years in the Persian Gulf finally culminated in a dramatic naval standoff between the United States and Iran. In the summer of 2019, both nations found themselves in a high-stakes game of brinkmanship, as U.S. warships and Iranian forces maneuvered through the narrow and volatile waters of the Strait of Hormuz. The first major confrontation occurred on June 13th, when two oil tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman, a critical passage for global energy supplies. The United States accused Iran of carrying out the strikes, though Tehran denied any involvement. Despite the denials, the U.S. military responded swiftly, dispatching additional forces to the region, including the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier and a number of destroyers. In response, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, began to take more aggressive actions, sending waves of fast boats and drones into the area, causing the tension to skyrocket. It was the following month, however, that the situation reached a boiling point. The U.S. Navy, aware of Iran's frequent provocations, had been on high alert, and the crew of the USS Boxer, an amphibious assault ship, was prepared for anything. The Boxer was patrolling the Gulf when Iranian forces deployed a squadron of high-speed attack boats. These boats, armed with anti-ship missiles, closed in on the U.S. ship at an alarming speed. The U.S. Navy was prepared for a variety of scenarios, but nothing could have prepared them for the sheer audacity of the Iranian maneuver. As the boats neared, the Boxer's radar locked onto them, but before the U.S. ship could react, the Iranian boats launched a coordinated attack. A barrage of missiles flew toward the Boxer, but the U.S. Navy had already activated its missile defense systems. The first few missiles were intercepted, but as the Iranian boats continued to fire and dart around the Boxer, it became clear that the situation was deteriorating fast. In a bold and dangerous move, the U.S. Navy decided to take preemptive action, launching a series of precision-guided airstrikes against the Iranian boats. The U.S. fighter jets took off from the USS Boxer, streaking through the skies with the roar of afterburners as they engaged the Iranian forces. The first wave of strikes disabled a number of boats, sending plumes of smoke into the air, while a second wave targeted Iranian drone sites that were attempting to jam U.S. communications. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy deployed its elite SEAL Team 6 to secure the area around the Boxer, ensuring that no further attacks could disrupt the operation. The U.S. military maintained control over the situation, but the strike did not come without repercussions. Iran, feeling the sting of this humiliation, vowed to retaliate. The Iranian response came in the form of a missile barrage aimed at U.S. interests in the region. Iranian military leaders were prepared for a full-scale assault on U.S. naval assets. On July 14th, Iran launched a series of long-range missiles from a hidden facility in the Iranian desert, targeting U.S. Navy bases in Bahrain and Qatar. Although the missiles were intercepted by U.S. anti-missile defense systems, the message was clear. Iran was willing to escalate the conflict, and the stakes had just been raised. The world watched as the U.S. Navy began a massive show of force, deploying more ships, submarines, and aircraft to the region in an effort to contain the growing crisis. The situation was further complicated by the involvement of regional allies. The U.S. Navy, already stretched thin, had to rely on support from countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. These nations provided additional naval forces, offering air support and intelligence capabilities to counter Iran's growing military power. But even with these reinforcements, the U.S. Navy found itself in a precarious position, as Iranian forces continued to expand their presence in the Gulf. The Iranian Navy, supported by its vast network of proxy forces, began to tighten the noose around U.S. assets in the region. Iranian drones flew over U.S. ships, scanning them for weaknesses, while Iranian fast boats patrolled the waters, ready to strike at a moment's notice. The U.S. Navy had to remain on high alert, knowing that a single misstep could lead to a full-blown war. On August 3rd, a dramatic incident occurred that would forever change the course of the conflict. Iranian forces, now equipped with a new generation of stealth drones, launched a surprise attack on a U.S. Navy convoy. The drones, which had been developed in secret over the previous months, were almost invisible to U.S. radar systems, and they carried powerful explosive payloads capable of disabling even the most advanced ships. The drones swarmed over the convoy, launching coordinated strikes against several U.S. vessels. The USS Stout, a guided missile destroyer, was struck by one of the drones, causing significant damage to the ship's propulsion system and temporarily incapacitating it. The U.S. Navy quickly initiated a counteroffensive, launching airstrikes to neutralize the drone threat, but the damage had been done. The situation was now on the brink of total war. As the world watched, the U.S. and Iranian forces were on the edge of a full-scale naval confrontation. Diplomatic efforts were quickly put into motion, with the United Nations calling for an emergency session to discuss the growing crisis. The international community feared that the conflict could spill beyond the Gulf, dragging in other nations and destabilizing the entire region. But despite the pressure, both the US and Iran were locked in a deadly game of chess, each side reluctant to back down. In the days that followed, there was a flurry of diplomatic activity. US officials worked tirelessly behind the scenes, negotiating with their allies and attempting to gain support for sanctions against Iran. Meanwhile, Iran made it clear that it would not be intimidated by international pressure, stating that its actions were a legitimate response to US provocations. The US Navy, however, was not prepared to let Iran continue to harass its ships without consequences. On August 10th, the US launched a series of retaliatory airstrikes, targeting Iranian military installations in the Gulf and destroying several key radar and missile sites. It was a clear message that the United States would not tolerate further attacks. At the same time, the U.S. sought to maintain some semblance of control over the situation, working with allies to enforce a no-fly zone over the Gulf. This was an attempt to prevent Iran from deploying more drones and missile systems that could threaten U.S. vessels. The world watched as the U.S. Navy, bolstered by international support, began to push back against Iran's growing naval presence. The confrontation eventually reached a fragile stalemate, with both sides exhausted but unwilling to back down. The world was left wondering whether this would be the start of an all-out war or if diplomacy would prevail once again. The Persian Gulf had become the stage for one of the most intense military standoffs of the 21st century, and its outcome would have far-reaching consequences for the future of global politics and military strategy.